Kindness without boundaries invites exploitation because human behavior is shaped by patterns, not intentions. When kindness is offered endlessly, predictably, and without limits, it stops being interpreted as a choice and starts being interpreted as a resource. People do not consciously decide to exploit. They adapt to what is available. If support, flexibility, forgiveness, or labor is always present regardless of how they act, there is no internal or external signal telling them to slow down, reciprocate, or self-correct. Over time, kindness becomes absorbed into the background of the relationship, no longer seen as generosity but as part of the environment, like air or electricity, noticed only when it disappears. Boundaries are what give kindness its meaning. A boundary does not negate kindness, it defines it. When someone knows that your kindness has conditions rooted in self-respect, they understand that it is something offered, not owed. Without those conditions, kindness loses its contrast. It no longer stands out as care, it blends into obligation. The absence of boundaries teaches others, silently and efficiently, that access to you is unconditional. And when access is unconditional, behavior rarely improves. It stabilizes at the level that is easiest for the other person. Exploitation often emerges not from malice, but from convenience. People tend to take the path of least resistance emotionally and practically. If one person consistently absorbs inconvenience, discomfort, or extra effort, others will naturally allow that imbalance to persist. Not because they are cruel, but because the system works for them. Boundaries interrupt that system. They force awareness. They require choice. Without them, kindness becomes a lubricant for imbalance, making unfair dynamics run more smoothly rather than stopping them. There is also a psychological shift that happens when kindness lacks limits. It becomes detached from agency. True kindness comes from choice. I am doing this because I want to. When boundaries are absent, the internal experience often shifts to I am doing this because I have to, even if the words never leave your mouth. Others sense that shift even unconsciously. What was once a gift becomes a role you play. And roles are exploited more easily than choices, because roles are expected to perform regardless of cost. Being nice is not the same as being respected, because niceness is often passive, while respect is relational and earned through clarity. Niceness prioritizes comfort. Respect prioritizes recognition. A nice person smooths edges, avoids tension, and adapts themselves to the room. A respected person signals where the edges are. Respect does not require dominance or aggression, it requires coherence. When your words, actions, limits, and follow-through align, people know where you stand. That predictability rooted in self-respect creates gravity. Niceness without that alignment creates softness without structure. Respect grows when people see that you value yourself enough to be consistent, even when it is inconvenient. Niceness often collapses under pressure. It bends to keep peace. Respect holds shape. When someone repeatedly gives way, minimizes themselves, or avoids asserting needs, others unconsciously downgrade the weight of their preferences. Not because they dislike them, but because the person themselves has signaled that their needs are negotiable, flexible, or secondary. Over time, that signal becomes the lens through which everything else is viewed. Niceness also tends to rely on unspoken contracts. If I am good, understanding, and accommodating, I will be treated well. Respect does not function on silent agreements, it functions on explicit behavior. When those unspoken contracts are broken, as they often are, the nice person feels confused and hurt, while the other person feels surprised by the expectation. Respect avoids this gap because it makes expectations visible. It says, through action, this is how I engage, and this is what I require to stay engaged. Another key difference is that niceness seeks approval, while respect tolerates disapproval. A person focused on being nice often fears being seen as difficult, selfish, or unkind. That fear shapes their behavior more than their values do. Be recognize it in service of truth. This willingness signals strength, not hardness, but solidity. People may not always like it, but they recognize it. And recognition is the root of respect. When niceness replaces boundaries, it can actually erode trust. Others may sense inconsistency. You agree, but resent. You comply, but withdraw. You smile, but feel hurt. That mismatch creates emotional static. Respect thrives on clean signals. Even a firm no can feel safer than a reluctant yes, because it allows everyone to orient themselves honestly. Respect is less about pleasing and more about being legible. Ultimately, kindness without boundaries and niceness without respect both stem from the same misunderstanding. That self-erasure is the price of connection. In reality, sustainable connection requires presence, not disappearance. Boundaries and respect do not make kindness colder. They make it real. They ensure that kindness remains an active choice rather than a passive surrender, and that relationships are built on mutual recognition rather than quiet imbalance. Overgiving teaches others what you'll tolerate because behavior calibrates itself around the most permissive limit in a relationship. What you repeatedly allow becomes the rule, not the exception. When you give more time than you have, more patience than feels honest, or more access than feels safe, you are not just helping, you are setting a baseline. Others learn through repetition that your internal limits are flexible or invisible. This learning does not require intention. People absorb patterns far more readily than words. Each time overgiving goes unaddressed, it reinforces the idea that your capacity is larger than it truly is, and that exceeding it carries no consequence. Overgiving often disguises itself as generosity, but its long-term effect is instructional. It teaches people that effort does not need to be mutual to be sustained. When one person consistently compensates for imbalance emotionally, practically, or relationally, the system stabilizes around that compensation. Others do not feel urgency to adjust because the cost is not theirs to bear. The giver becomes the shock absorber of the relationship, absorbing strain so others can remain comfortable. Over time, this creates an unspoken expectation. You will stretch. And once an expectation is formed, withdrawing that excess feels like a failure rather than a correction. There is also a self-betrayal embedded in overgiving that subtly reshapes how others perceive you. When your actions repeatedly contradict your limits, people receive mixed signals about your self-respect. Even kind people unconsciously track who enforces their boundaries and who dissolves them. Overgiving signals that your needs are negotiable, that your exhaustion is secondary, and that your availability is not something that needs to be earned. This does not invite care. It invites reliance, and reliance without respect easily slides into entitlement. Overgiving also erodes clarity. Because you are always filling gaps, others never see where their responsibility begins. They may genuinely believe they are doing enough, because the system has shielded them from the full impact of their inaction. When your kindness becomes invisible, when it is constant because the human nervous system adapts quickly to steady conditions, what is consistent fades into the background of perception, not because it lacks value, but because it lacks contrast. When kindness is always present, always forgiving, always accommodating, always available, it stops registering as an active gesture and starts registering as the natural order of things. The same care that would feel generous in moderation becomes unnoticed when it is uninterrupted. This is not a moral failure on anyone's part. It is a cognitive one. People are wired to notice change, not continuity. When kindness is invisible, it is no longer interpreted as effort. The energy, time, and emotional labor behind it disappear from view. Others experience the benefit without seeing the cost. This creates a dangerous asymmetry. One person feels depleted by what they give, while the other feels neutral receiving it. Over time, this gap widens. The giver feels unseen, the receiver feels entitled. Not because the receiver consciously decides to devalue the kindness, but because constancy trains the mind to treat care as a baseline rather than a contribution. Invisible kindness also distorts feedback loops. Gratitude is often triggered by interruption, by noticing that something could have been absent but wasn't. When kindness is constant, there is no interruption to trigger appreciation. There is no moment of recognition that says, this didn't have to happen. Without that recognition, appreciation fades even if affection remains. This is why people often only realize the value of someone's kindness when it is withdrawn. Absence restores contrast. What was once invisible becomes painfully clear. There is a quiet loneliness that comes from invisible kindness. You are present, reliable, and supportive, yet emotionally unseen. Your efforts don't spark response, they maintain stability. And while stability is valuable, it is rarely celebrated. This can lead to a paradoxical situation where the kinder you are, the less impact you feel you have. Your presence prevents problems but does not create moments. You become essential but unacknowledged, foundational but replaceable in feeling. That erosion of recognition can slowly hollow out your sense of worth within the relationship. Gratitude fades when access is unlimited, because unlimited access removes the sense of choice. When someone can reach you at any time, rely on you without question, or assume your availability, your presence stops feeling like a gift and starts feeling like infrastructure. Infrastructure is used, not thanked. It is depended on, not appreciated. The more predictable and unrestricted the access, the less conscious people become of receiving anything at all. What once felt like generosity becomes entitlement through sheer repetition. Unlimited access also removes the emotional pause that gratitude requires. Gratitude lives in the space between desire and fulfillment. When that space collapses, when needs are met instantly and consistently, there is no pause to reflect, no moment to register appreciation. Everything arrives too smoothly. The system works too well. And when systems work seamlessly, attention moves elsewhere. The emotional spotlight shifts to what is missing, not what is reliably provided. This dynamic is especially damaging because it punishes reliability. The person who shows up consistently is taken for granted, while the person who is intermittent is often valued more intensely. Scarcity heightens attention, abundance dulls it. This doesn't mean people should become withholding or manipulative, but it does mean that unlimited access undermines the psychological mechanisms that sustain gratitude. Without limits, appreciation has nothing to push against. It cannot fall. There is also a subtle power shift when access is unlimited. The person with fewer boundaries carries more emotional responsibility, while the other carries more freedom. Freedom rarely feels grateful. It feels natural. The person with access begins to feel ownership over the relationship's rhythm, while the giver feels like they are constantly on call. Over time, this imbalance erodes mutuality. Gratitude cannot survive where one person's availability is assumed rather than chosen. Ultimately, constant kindness and unlimited access flatten emotional meaning. They remove texture from relationships. When everything is always available, nothing feels special. When kindness never pauses, it is no longer felt as kindness. It is felt as background noise. Limits are not what make relationships cold. They are what make warmth noticeable. Without them, even the most genuine care can disappear in plain sight.